Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle and this is the final recommendations videos for the prompts for March Mystery Madness. I've had so much fun doing these videos and I hope you have found them helpful. This video is some recommendations for you for the prompt space. Now this one is really wide open. It could be, the title could have something to do with outer space, sun, moon, and stars, but it could also just have to do with a particular space. And so you're going to see what I mean by that through the titles that I recommend here. I could not find a book that I own that has the word space in the title. And so we will have to forego that category for this video. Which is too bad because I've enjoyed doing that, looking for books that have the word in the title. But let's just jump straight into my Christie Commendations. This is Crooked House from 1948. This is a standalone of hers about the Leonides family. I'm pretty sure I'm not saying that right. Aristide Leonides, I'm not going to say it right. He died at Three Gables with his numerous loved ones around him, but it was murder, right enough. The suspects, his young wife and her lover, and the motive, hundreds of thousands of pounds, were obvious. Too obvious. Because the truth was that any one of the denizens of the vast and rambling house could have killed the grand and generous old man. All murder is unnatural, but this one was beginning to look a little more unnatural than most. The Body in the Library from 1941. This is a Miss Marple, and this is such a fun one. I really like the Body in the Library. So this one is set at, I forget what their house is called, but it's the Bantrys, Gossington Hall. Dolly Bantry and her husband, Colonel Arthur Bantry, are woken up one morning by the scream of their maid because she has found a body in the library. And so, of course, Colonel Bantry calls the police, but Mrs. Bantry calls Miss Marple. Death in the Clouds from 1935. This is a Hercule Poirot, and again, this one is so fantastic. This one doesn't get talked about enough. I think it's an underrated Agatha Christie. Poirot is on a plane from France back to England, and there are a small number of people in his particular compartment on the plane, like maybe 12 people. There's even a plan here. And someone is murdered during the flight. And so it's great because you have this closed circle, locked room almost, traveling mystery, and Poirot himself is a suspect because he is on that plane. But even more worrying is that Poirot didn't see it happen. He didn't see anything either. And so it is such a great Poirot. I really like Death in the Clouds. This one is also called Death in the Air. And then Evil Under the Sun from 1941. This is also a Poirot. He is on holiday in Devon, I believe, or Cornwall. It's a little island just off the coast. And there are a number of guests at this hotel, and Arlena Marshall is found dead on the beach. Okay, let's move into some recommendations for historical mysteries. This is The Music of the Spheres by Elizabeth Redfern. First of all, can I just say I love that title. I love that phrase, The Music of the Spheres. It's just so melodious, isn't it? Okay, so this book is set in London in 1799. Jonathan Aspey, what's his name? Anyway, he is a Home Office clerk who's been tasked with smashing a French spy ring. In rural Kensington, there is a group of French emigres who are pursuing the scientific dream of discovering a planet that they call Selene. And prostitutes are being murdered, All of them have been paid with the currency of French spies. The Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie by Alan Bradley from 2009. This is the first in his Flavia de Luce series. So a pie, or even more specifically the bottom of a pie, is a definite space. I think it's it is a definite space, so I am counting it. This book was the winner of the Crime Writers Association debut Dagger Award. It is set in 1950, and our main character is 11-year-old Flavia de Luce, an aspiring chemist with a passion for poison. Now, I wasn't sure when I first read this if I would like a child narrator, but I did, and it was really very entertaining. So, I mean, there are times when she can be annoying because she's 11, but for the most part, it was really good. So it's the summer of 1950, and a series of inexplicable events has struck Buckshaw, the decaying English mansion that Flavia's family calls home. A dead bird is found on the doorstep, a post-it stamp bizarrely pinned to its beak. Hours later, Flavia finds a man lying in the cucumber patch and watches him as he takes his final breath. For Flavia, who is both appalled and delighted, life begins in earnest when murder comes to Buckshaw. She is quoted as saying, "I wish I could say I was afraid, but I wasn't. Quite the contrary. This was by far the most interesting thing that had ever happened to me in my entire life." The Skeleton in the Grass by Robert Barnard. This was written in 1987, and it is set in 1936. The clouds of war gathered over Europe, but in the small English village, new governess Sarah Kearsley was enchanted with the Halloms of Hallam House. The cucumber sandwiches at tea time, the charming conversation, the passionate concern with peace and principle. That's why the nasty pranks came as such a shock. Someone in the village was waging a hate campaign, making the Hallams victims of cruel taunts that could lead to terror. But until the dirty tricks turned deadly, no one guessed what real malice grew in the countryside, or the identity of the killer who left on the gracious Hallam lawn both a skeleton and a corpse. The Lady Chapel by Candace Robb. This was written in 1994, and it's the second in her Owen Archer series. High Summer 1365, and York is glorious with pageantry for the feast of Corpus Christi. But wool merchant Will Crounce, who acts in The Last Judgment, which is a play, meets his maker all too soon, his throat slit in the shadow of the great cathedral. When Crounce's severed hand is found in fellow merchant Gilbert Ridley's tavern lodging, the Archbishop calls in Owen Archer. The House of Silk by Anthony Horowitz. This is from 2011, and it's the first of his Sherlock Holmes books. These were, what's the word? He was given permission to write these from the estate of Arthur Conan Doyle. London, 1890. 221B Baker Street. A fine arts dealer named Edmund Carstairs visits Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson to beg for their help. He is being menaced by a strange man in a flat cap, a wanted criminal who seems to have followed him all the way from America. In the days that follow, Carstairs' home is robbed and his family is threatened. Then the first murder takes place. The City of Shadows by Michael Russell. This was published in 2012, and it is set in Dublin in 1934. Detective Stefan Gillespie arrests a German doctor and encounters Hannah Rosen, desperate to find her friend Susan, a Jewish woman who had become involved with a priest and has now disappeared. When the bodies of a man and woman are found buried in the Dublin mountains, it becomes clear that this case is about more than a missing person. Stefan and Hannah trace the evidence all the way across Europe to Danzig. In a strange city where the Nazi party is gaining power, Stefan and Hannah are inching closer to the truth and soon find themselves in grave danger. All right, and then 2 from the Lady Hardcastle series by T.E. Kinsey. This is A Quiet Life in the Country and Death Beside the Seaside. So A Quiet Life in the Country is the first in the series from 2014. Death Beside the Seaside is the 6th in the series from 2019. So, Lady Emily Hardcastle is an eccentric widow with a secret past. Florence Armstrong, her maid and confidant, is an expert in martial arts. The year is 1908, and they've just moved from London to the country, hoping for a quiet life. But it is not long before Lady Hardcastle is forced out of her self-imposed retirement. There's a dead body in the woods, and the police are on the wrong scent. Okay, The Rose Garden by Susanna Kearsley. This is from 2011. This is about an American who leaves California and returns to Cornwall, where she and her sister spent their childhood summers. Her sister, who was a film star, died, and she goes there to scatter her ashes. But she also has to confront the ghosts of her own past. The house where she still often stayed as a child is home not only to her old friends the Hallets, but also to the people who lived there in the 18th century. When Eva finally accepts that she is able to slip between centuries and see and talk to the inhabitants from hundreds of years ago, she soon finds herself falling for Daniel Butler, a man who lived and died long before she was born. Very interesting. The Bone Garden by Tess Gerritsen. This is from 2007. And this one was really good. I really enjoyed this one. Present day, Julia Hamill makes a horrifying discovery on the grounds of her new home in rural Massachusetts. A skull buried in the rocky soil, human, female, and according to the trained eye of Boston medical examiner Maura Isles, scarred with the unmistakable marks of murder long ago. Boston, 1830. To pay for his education, medical student Norris Marshall has joined the ranks of local resurrectionists, those who plunder graveyards and harvest the dead for sale on the black market. Norris now finds himself the prime suspect in a series of grisly murders. Joined by a sardonic young man named Oliver Wendell Holmes, Norris sets out to prove his innocence and track down a maniacal fiend, part of the dark mystery reaching across the centuries to the present-day world of Julia Hamill. So this has Maura Isles in it, but it's not part of the Rosolian Isles series that Tess Gerritsen writes. This one was really good. Fear in the Forest by Bernard Knight. This is from 2003, and it is the 7th in the series. And can I just say, I love these covers. I think they're so well done, and I just really like them. Okay, so we are in 12th century Devon. Much of the country lies under the iron rule of the royal forest laws, with all hunting reserved to the king. The penalty for gathering firewood on the king's land is imprisonment. The penalty for killing a deer, mutilation or death. These harsh laws are rigorously upheld by the king's foresters, notorious for their greed and corruption. June 1195, a tall brown mare gallops into the sleepy village of Sigford, the broken shaft of an arrow protruding from its rider's back. The embroidered badge sewn on the dead man's tunic identifies him as a senior officer of the royal forest. The Haunted Bookshop by Christopher Morley. This was written in... Oh, sorry. I guess I should back up and say we are now moving into classic crime, vintage crime, golden age crime. And so we have The Haunted Bookshop by Christopher Morley, written in 1919. This is set in Brooklyn. Helen and Roger Mifflin have traded in their wagon bookshop for the serene life of running a secondhand bookstore on Gissing Street in Brooklyn. But life became markedly less serene with the arrival of the beautiful young heiress Titania Chapman. Her father thought a job in a bookstore would be just the thing to get rid of the ridiculous notions that finishing schools can put into young girls' minds. And when handsome Aubrey Gilbert fell in love with Titania, things really started hopping. But these events were nowhere near as unsettling as the sudden interest of two foreigners in the Mifflin's little bookshop, and particularly in Carlyle's Oliver Cromwell. Their interest was less than innocent, however, and before it was over, Oliver Cromwell and the Haunted Bookshop had traveled all the way from quiet Gissing Street to the screaming headlines of the New York newspapers. From This Dark Stairway by Mignon Eberhart. This was published in 1931 and again set in the U.S. Nurse Nancy Page was beautiful and she knew it. She was also aware that a rich, important patient had his eye on her, but she didn't care. One night, the patient disappeared under bizarre circumstances. Then, murder rocked the hospital. Nancy had a sudden attack of terror, for the killer had written a prescription for the death of one Nancy Page. Murder on Safari by Elspeth Huxley. This was written in 1938. Lord and Lady Barradale are on a posh safari in Kenya. When Lady Barradale's jewels are stolen, a young Canadian policeman, Vachel, is called in. He sets to work on the theft, but is interrupted by murder. The Man in the Queue by Josephine Tay from 1929. This is one of her Inspector Grant series. Waiting to see a sellout musical comedy, a young man sank slowly to his knees and keeled over. A jeweled dagger gleaming in the baleful light rose from the gray tweed of his coat. For Inspector Alan Grant, the case would become a nightmare as he tried to discover the identities of a dead man nobody knew and a killer nobody had seen. Dark of the Moon by John Dickson Carr from 1967. This is the 23rd and last of his Dr. Gideon Fell series, and this is set in Charleston in South Carolina. When that eminent solver of crimes, Dr. Gideon Fell, is invited to a weekend party at the stately southern mansion of Henry Maynard, a man he hardly knows, he naturally wonders why. Once in Maynard Hall, Dr. Fell notices a skeleton at the feast. The guests are being tormented by a series of inexplicable events. The answer comes soon enough. The Maynard family and the old house itself are steeped in dark secrets. And before the party is over, a diabolical murder is committed. A murder which is the exact duplicate of one committed nearly 3 centuries ago. Heirs Above the Ground by Mary Stewart. This is from 1965. Lovely Vanessa March did not think it was strange for her husband to take a business trip to Stockholm. What was strange was the silence that followed. Then she caught a glimpse of him in a newsreel shot of a crowd near a mysterious circus fire in Vienna and knew it was more than strange. It was downright sinister. And then finally in this category is Murder in the Museum by John Rowland from 1938. When Professor Julius Arnell breathes his last in the hushed atmosphere of the British Museum reading room, it looks like death from natural causes. Who, after all, would have cause to murder a retired academic whose life was devoted to Elizabethan literature? Inspector Shelley's suspicions are aroused when he finds a packet of poisoned sugared almonds in the dead man's pocket, and a motive becomes clearer when he discovers Arnell's connection to a Texas oil millionaire. Let's move into some police procedurals or private detectives. This is Poachers Road by John Brady. This is from 2006. 2 bodies are found on a path in the Austrian woods. The Kripo from Graz take over the investigation, but still requires help from Inspector Felix Kimmel. He is a local man who knows the area and its people. The dead man's identities are not known, but they are thought to be from somewhere in Eastern Europe. An autopsy on one man reveals a small tattoo that suggests membership in a Croatian paramilitary gang. The day after the discovery, the family who had called the gendarmerie dies in a house fire. Felix is drawn further into this murder and now arson investigation. Whoever set fire to the farmhouse may want Felix next. A Knife at the Opera by Staines and Story. This is the second in their Superintendent Bone series from 1988. Murder was the last thing Superintendent Bone needed when, on a rare evening off, he went to see his daughter's school performance of the Beggar's Opera, and found himself staring at the bloody corpse of Miss Fairley, the prettiest and most ambitious teacher at the school. His investigation was not helped by the fact that at the time of the murder, half the school seemed to be trailing around in various operatic disguises. Dead Man's Path by John Buxton Hilton. This is the first in his Inspector Kenworthy series from 1968. This is also called Death of an Alderman. Edward Barson was one of the most powerful men in town, and the most hated. Who didn't have a motive to kill him? The suspects were many, the clues were few, and the weapon a museum piece. Quite a big mystery for such a small town, but Inspector Kenworthy had an unlikely helper, a spunky little miss who seemed to know everyone's dirty little secrets. Murder at the Old Vicarage by Jill McGowan. This is from 1988, and it is the second in her Lloyd and Hill series. This is also called Redemption. A killing blow on the head took the life of Graham Elstow, and the vicar and his wife were more relieved than grieved. Elstow had beaten their beloved daughter so severely that she had landed in the hospital, and he had struck her again on the day she died. But murder they deplored, especially in their own home on Christmas Eve. Arriving on the scene are the canny police duo of Inspector Lloyd and Detective Sergeant Hill, perfectly matched as they investigate Yuletide malice most undomestic. The Bitter Path of Death by Pierre Audemers from 1982. This is the 25th in his Monsieur Pinard series, set in Paris. Could unswerving devotion have been used as a murder weapon? And why wouldn't a powerful woman try to move heaven and earth to have the murderer of her only son captured? Everyone wants Monsieur Pinot of the Paris Sûreté off the case, but he is intrigued enough to put his life and job on the line in this tragic tale of bad seed, family honor, love, and vengeance. Okay, I have a legal thriller for you. This is Old City Hall by Robert Rottenberg from 2009. It is the first in his Detective Green series. Did Canada's favorite radio host commit murder? Kevin Brace, Canada's most famous radio personality, stands in the doorway of his luxury condominium, hands covered in blood, and announces to his newspaper delivery man, "I killed her." His wife lies dead in the bathtub, fatally stabbed. It would appear to be an open and shut case. The trouble is, Brace refuses to talk to anyone, including his own lawyer, after muttering those incriminating words. With the discovery that the victim was actually a self-destructive alcoholic, the appearance of strange fingerprints at the crime scene, and a revealing courtroom cross-examination, the seemingly simple case takes on all the complexities of a hotly contested murder trial. And then one in the amateur sleuth category. This is Mansions of the Dead by Sarah Stewart Taylor. This is from 2004, and it's the second in her Sweeney St. George series. And I really like this series. There's only 4 books in it, but they're really good. Sweeney St. George concedes that having lunch in Boston's Mount Auburn Cemetery might be a bit macabre. Yet the graveyard fits her interests as an art professor with a specialty in cemetery statuary and mourning jewelry. And although she doesn't realize it, this historic burial ground is one of the last places on earth her favorite student, Brad Putnam, scion of the famous Boston family, sees before somebody murders him. Okay, and then I have a couple cozies. Death by the Light of the Moon by Joan Hess. This is from 1992 and it's the 7th in her Claire Malloy series. This is a series set in Arkansas and Claire Malloy runs a bookstore. No wonder my late unlamented husband never talked about his happy childhood. He didn't have one. This revelation strikes Claire Malloy the instant she meets her passel of venomous Malloy in-laws. So she's been invited down to their Louisiana estate to hear the family matriarch give a preview of her latest will. And then that matriarch and her wheelchair end up in the bayou. And then The Skeleton in the Closet by M.C. Beaton from 2001. This is a standalone. Ever since the death of his father, poor Fellworth Dolphin has slaved away as a waiter to support his miserly, cold-hearted mother. When his mother suddenly dies, Fellworth is shocked to discover that she has left him a sizable inheritance. Confused, Fell teams up with Maggie, a plain girl with a similar background, to investigate the source of the riches, but what they find is a closet full of skeletons. And then a couple in the other category. This is The Woods by Harlan Coben from 2007. County Prosecutor Paul Copeland is still getting over the loss of his sister 20 years ago, the night she walked into the woods, never to be seen again. Now, as Cope struggles to raise his 6-year-old daughter alone and try one of the biggest cases of his career, evidence links him to a man who has been viciously murdered. The victim could be the boy who disappeared along with Cope's sister, and hope rises that his sister could still be alive. And then finally, A Nun in the Closet by Dorothy Gilman from 1975. This is also a standalone. From the moment Sister John and Sister Hyacinth set out to explore the huge old house left to their abbey by a mysterious benefactor, their cloistered world begins to crumble. First, there's the wounded man hiding in an upstairs closet. Then there's the old battered suitcase stuffed with money sitting at the bottom of the well. Not to mention the apparitions in the night or the white powder they find in the pantry's sugar jars that doesn't taste like sugar at all. So there you have it. Those are my recommendations for the prompt space. I hope these gave you some ideas of books that you have that might fill this prompt. And I would love to know what you're reading for this prompt for March Mystery Madness. So let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you for another video soon. Bye.